Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Fears family. Tonight we're setting sail, far from the safety of the shore, into the deep, endless waters where laughter fades and whispers echo through steel corridors. Cruise ships are meant to be places of joy, but when you're miles from land, surrounded by nothing but dark water, even a single knock on your cabin door can feel like a heartbeat from something unnatural. One night, a crew member swore he saw a passenger standing at the railing, pale, drenched, staring into the black ocean below. He rushed over, but there was no one there. The CCTV footage? It showed her there too, until she simply vanished. Tonight, we'll uncover 10 of the most disturbing true cruise ship horror stories ever told. So before we set sail into the unknown, make sure you subscribe, turn on the bell, and join the Dark Fears family. Because once we drift into these waters, there's no turning back. Let's begin our descent into the deep. My name is Daniel, and this happened 5 years ago when I worked as a night steward aboard the Aurora Mist, a mid-sized luxury cruise ship that sailed between Miami and the Caribbean islands. It was my third voyage, and I had grown used to the hum of the engines, the gentle sway of the ocean, and the late-night calls from tipsy passengers. But on our fourth night, something strange happened. A woman approached the reception desk, tall, pale, wearing an old-fashioned white dress. She asked me to check her cabin key, saying she'd misplaced it. When I searched the manifest for her name, Evelyn Hartman, there was no record of her anywhere. When I looked up, she was gone. No sound of footsteps, no elevator bell. Nothing. At first, I thought it was just fatigue or a prank by another crew member. But then, an hour later, a guest complained about a woman standing motionless in front of cabin 307, whispering something under her breath. When I reached cabin 307, the hallway was freezing, far colder than any part of the ship I'd ever been in. The air felt heavy, still. I could hear the distant sound of the ship's engines below, but nothing else. Then I saw her, the same woman, her hair dripping as if she'd come from the ocean. She was facing the cabin door, whispering something over and over. He never came back. He never came back. Ma'am, I said, stepping closer. She turned her head, but not like a normal person. It was slow, deliberate, her neck bending too far. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale as wax. I froze. My radio crackled, breaking the silence. I blinked. She was gone again. When I knocked on cabin 307, the passenger inside, a middle-aged man, looked confused. He said no one had been outside his door. He also mentioned something chilling. Every night, he said, I hear someone knocking 3 times. But when I open the door, there's no one there. The next morning, I asked the front desk to confirm again. No Evelyn Hartman listed anywhere on the passenger manifest. I even checked the archived bookings. Nothing. But that night, I noticed something else. Her name was now appearing on a cleaning list, printed automatically for our shift logs. Cabin 307. When I showed it to my supervisor, she laughed nervously. That's impossible, she said. The computer system doesn't make manual changes. We decided to check the cabin again. The man inside was polite, but shaken. He showed us water stains forming on his cabin wall, like fingerprints dragged down the wallpaper. And in his bathroom mirror, condensation spelled out 2 words. Help me. He thought it was a prank, but I wasn't so sure. Later, when I looked through the ship's CCTV logs, the feed outside cabin 307 flickered every night around 3:17 a.m., exactly when guests claimed to hear knocking. When I paused the footage on one of those moments, I could make out her reflection, standing in front of the door. The following night, I borrowed a crew night vision camera and decided to stay near cabin 307 after hours. I hid behind a cleaning cart, my flashlight off, the soft creak of the ship beneath my feet. At 3:17 a.m., right on cue, the temperature plummeted again. My breath fogged the air. Then, 3 knocks. Soft, slow, hollow. Through the night vision lens, I saw her emerge from the dark end of the corridor, barefoot, soaked, her dress trailing wet footprints across the carpet. She stopped in front of the cabin door, her head twitching slightly. And then, she turned, staring directly into my camera. Her lips moved silently, but the sound that came through my earpiece was a low, distorted moan, like a voice underwater. When I replayed the footage the next morning, the timestamp was still there. But the corridor was empty. The woman? Gone. Only the knocking remained, echoing faintly in the recording. The man in cabin 307 asked to be moved to another room. When I went to help him pack, he told me something that froze my blood. His wife's name had been Evelyn. Evelyn Hartman. She drowned 6 years earlier on the same cruise line after falling overboard during a storm. Her body was never recovered. He had taken this voyage to say goodbye properly. But ever since the second night, he said, he'd been hearing her voice outside his cabin, whispering, crying, asking him, "Why didn't you save me?" I didn't know what to say. I offered to escort him to another cabin. He agreed. But as we left, I glanced back into cabin 307. On the mirror, the condensation spelled out, "Don't leave me again." Later that day, the man was gone. His luggage still inside the cabin. Security reviewed the cameras. They showed him walking to the deck railing around midnight and then vanishing from view. After his disappearance, the ship conducted a full search. The captain ordered a sweep of all decks and cabins. Nothing. No body, no splash reports, no alarms. When we reviewed the deck footage again, we saw something that made several of us leave the room. At 12:01 a.m., the man walked toward the railing, and a woman in white appeared beside him. They stood together for several seconds. Then both figures simply faded. The sea was calm that night. No wind, no waves. For the rest of the voyage, guests complained about cold spots, whispers in the hallways, and the sound of footsteps above their cabins long after midnight. On our final night, as we approached Miami, I walked past cabin 307 one last time. The door was open. Inside, the lights flickered and faint water dripped from the ceiling, though no leak was found. And on the bed lay 2 wet footprints, side by side. When we docked in Miami, I went straight to the crew office to report everything. I showed them my footage, the logs, even the altered cleaning list with Evelyn's name. But when they checked the passenger manifest again, her name was now officially listed. Cabin 307, Evelyn Hartman. No one could explain it. The timestamp of her booking was dated the same night she first appeared to me. Worse, there was now a second name added beneath hers. Robert Hartman, the missing husband. The captain dismissed it as a data error. But the IT technician swore it was impossible for 2 deceased passengers to suddenly appear in the booking system. Before I left the ship, I checked cabin 307 once more. It was spotless, empty. Except for one thing. A single wet cruise card on the nightstand. The name printed on it, Evelyn and Robert Hartman. A month later, I signed up for another voyage on the same ship. Part of me hoped it was all a misunderstanding, exhaustion, paranoia, anything logical. On the second night, I walked past cabin 307. It was unoccupied again, listed as maintenance only, but I could still feel that same drop in temperature. Later that night, one of the new stewards came running, pale-faced. He swore someone was knocking on cabin 307's door. 3 slow knocks, just after 3 a.m. I followed him there. We stood in silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. I opened the door. The cabin was pitch dark. The air smelled of seawater. The radio on my belt crackled with static. And a faint female voice whispered through. He came back for me. I froze. The new steward backed away slowly. When I turned to look at him, he was already gone, sprinting down the hallway. I left my night vision camera running outside cabin 307 that night, recording from the opposite wall. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, my heart stopped. The video showed me standing in front of the cabin, but behind me, 2 silhouettes formed near the door. A man and a woman, both dripping wet, holding hands. As I turned to face the door, they smiled and vanished. The next frame showed something impossible. The cabin door was closed, but written across it in what looked like seawater were the words, "Together again." The captain refused to let me investigate further. Cabin 307 was permanently sealed after that voyage. They called it plumbing maintenance, but the crew all knew the truth. Even now, when the ship sails past the same stretch of Caribbean waters, the system logs 2 phantom passengers, always the same cabin, always the same names. It's been years since that voyage, but I can still hear it sometimes. That faint knock, knock, knock when I close my eyes at night. After I quit, I joined a smaller ferry service near the coast. It's quieter, safer, or so I thought. Last winter, a new passenger boarded during one of our short trips, a woman in a white dress. She smiled and handed me her ticket. When I scanned it, my device froze. The name displayed on the screen, Evelyn Hartman. Before I could look up, she was gone. That night, I dreamed of the ocean swallowing the aurora mist. I saw the cabin doors flooding, the hallways filling with dark water. And in the dream, she whispered, "We never left the ship." Sometimes, late at night, when the waves crash too hard against the hull, I swear I hear them both, together, walking the decks, reliving their final night. Forever passengers of the sea. My name is Lucas, and I've worked on several cruise lines over the last decade. But none of them haunt me like the Ocean Star, a massive ship with over 3,000 passengers and nearly 1,000 crew members. It started when a new deckhand named Mason joined our night maintenance crew. He was quiet, polite, and strangely pale, like someone who hadn't seen the sun in months. During the orientation, he barely spoke, just nodded and smiled faintly whenever the chief officer spoke. I was assigned to train him during night shifts. The first few nights were uneventful. We polished railings, checked lifeboats, and tightened ropes. But on the 5th night, as we worked on the upper deck, Mason pointed toward the black horizon and said quietly, "That's where it happened." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer, just stared into the water, his reflection trembling in the dark waves. Later, I checked his file in the crew database. It was blank, no photo, no emergency contact, nothing but his name, Mason Gray. The next night, Mason seemed different, distracted, constantly glancing at the sea. When I asked if something was wrong, he said, "The ocean remembers, Lucas. It never forgets who it takes." His words chilled me. Later that shift, as we cleaned the glass panels near the promenade deck, I noticed something strange in the reflection. Mason was wiping the glass beside me. But in the reflection, he wasn't there. It was just me, working alone. I froze, staring at the glass. Mason looked at me curiously. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," I lied. But my heart was pounding. The following morning, when I mentioned it to the safety officer, he brushed it off as exhaustion. "You've been pulling doubles. Get some rest." But then I checked the crew attendance system, and Mason's name wasn't logged for any shift that week. I even asked HR. They looked confused and said, "We don't have anyone named Mason Gray on the crew manifest." By the end of the week, whispers spread among the crew. People claimed to see a deckhand working alone near Deck 11, even when no one was assigned there. I decided to check for myself. The upper deck was empty except for the wind and the faint hum of the engines below. The security cameras had been glitching lately, showing static whenever Deck 11 appeared on screen. When I reached the far end, I saw Mason kneeling near the lifeboat section, tightening bolts. "Mason," I called, "you're not supposed to be up here." He didn't turn. When I approached, I saw the bolts were already rusted and broken, far too old for a new ship. Mason's hands were trembling. "We should have fixed these before the accident," he muttered. "What accident?" I asked. He looked up, his face pale and soaked with sweat. "The last voyage, the lifeboat cable snapped. They never found the bodies." I went straight to the archives the next morning. I didn't believe him until I found an old incident report from 2013 filed under restricted access. It detailed a lifeboat cable failure during a safety drill. 3 crew members had fallen into the ocean. Only 2 bodies were recovered. The third, Mason Gray, deckhand, age 27. I felt my stomach twist. Mason couldn't be the same person, right? It had to be some bizarre coincidence. But when I looked at the archived photo, the face staring back at me was unmistakable. The same pale features, the same hollow eyes. I ran to tell my supervisor, but when we checked the archives again, the photo was gone. Deleted. Later that night, I saw Mason again. He was standing at the exact spot where the lifeboat accident had occurred, staring down at the sea. When I shouted his name, he turned toward me slowly and whispered, "You shouldn't have looked for me." After that night, I started dreaming about the ocean. Dark, endless, and filled with whispering voices. Every time I woke up, my sheets were damp, as if sea mist had passed through my cabin. During our next maintenance shift, Mason avoided me completely. When I finally cornered him, I asked, "What are you? Why are you here?" He looked terrified. "I'm trying to fix it," he said. "They won't let me rest until the lifeboat's safe." "Who won't let you rest?" I demanded. He turned toward the water and whispered, "The others." The wind suddenly howled through the deck, slamming one of the lifeboat covers shut. When I looked back, Mason was gone. I ran to the railing, scanning the black waves. Nothing. No splash, no movement. Just the echo of the wind. That same night, an alarm went off. Lifeboat 3, cable malfunction. The same one. The same section. We rushed to Deck 11. The lifeboat dangled precariously from its cables, swaying violently. Salt water sprayed up, soaking the deck. The chief officer barked orders while the crew tried to stabilize it, but something unseen seemed to pull it downward. One of the cables snapped, exactly as the report from 2013 described. Suddenly, Mason appeared again at the edge of the deck. His uniform was soaked, torn, his skin grayish in the floodlight. He shouted something I could barely hear over the storm. "Cut the line!" Before anyone could react, the second cable tore free, The lifeboat dropped into the sea, vanishing into the dark waves below. The alarms ceased. Silence followed. When the captain reviewed the security footage later, the entire section where Mason had been standing was missing. A black void in the video. The only sound recorded was his voice, whispering, "It's done." The next morning, the crew gathered in silence. The captain demanded to know who triggered the lifeboat release. No one confessed. When they checked the maintenance log, a new entry had appeared automatically, time-stamped just before the malfunction. Cable replaced. MC Gray. Everyone looked at me. I couldn't breathe. I showed them the archived report, the one listing Mason as dead. But the captain shook his head. That's classified. That man died years ago. But if he was dead, who had I been working with all week? Later that day, I returned to Deck 11 alone. The deck was dry, calm. The air felt heavy, like it was watching me. Near the railing, I found a single name tag, half buried in rust. I brushed it off. M. Gray, deckhand. It was old, corroded, yet unmistakably real. That night, the weather changed again. Calm seas turned violent without warning. Lightning illuminated the sky as the ship rocked harder than ever before. I was off duty, but I heard the emergency announcement. "All crew to lifeboat stations." My heart pounded. I grabbed my jacket and ran to Deck 11. There, through sheets of rain, I saw him again. Mason was standing by the railing, staring straight at me. The lightning flashed behind him, and for an instant, I saw 3 other silhouettes standing beside him. Faint, translucent, their outlines shimmering in the storm. He raised his hand and pointed toward the cables. "Not again," he whispered. And then, they were gone. The storm calmed within minutes. The captain later said the storm disappeared off radar as if it had never existed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a storm. It was them. The voyage ended quietly after that night. No one spoke about what happened. Before disembarking, I checked the ship's maintenance records one last time. Under Deck 11, there was a new update automatically added that morning. Section secured. Lifeboat stable. Rest now, it was signed. M. Gray. The IT officer swore no one had access to that section of the system anymore. When I left the ship, I walked past the lifeboats. They hung perfectly still in the sun, the ocean calm and endless beneath them. As I looked over the railing, I thought I saw a shadow move in the reflection of the water. A hand reaching up, then fading away. A chill ran down my spine. I whispered a quiet thank you. Maybe Mason had finally fixed what he couldn't in life. Or maybe he was still out there, watching the lifeboats, waiting for the next storm. It's been 3 years since the Ocean Star voyage, but I still dream of Deck 11. In those dreams, I walk along the empty corridor, hearing the distant clang of cables and the faint sound of waves against the hull. Sometimes, I see Mason standing by the railing, his uniform dry this time, his face calm. He looks at me and says, "It's safe now." But other nights, he doesn't speak. He just stares at the sea, and behind him, I see the outlines of others, the ones who never came back. They stand there, watching, as if waiting for someone else to join them. Last month, I heard the Ocean Star had been decommissioned. The company cited unresolved maintenance failures on Deck 11. A few days later, I received an email with no sender address. The message was simple. "Thank you for helping me finish the job. M. Gray." I deleted it immediately. But every time I hear thunder now, I swear I can still hear his voice whispering, "Cut the line." My name is Samantha, and I worked as an onboard photographer on a luxury cruise ship in 2019. Most people assume that cruise ship jobs are all about sunsets and champagne. But what they don't see are the long nights, the quiet hallways, and the eerie sense of being trapped at sea. The ship I worked on had one restricted deck, Deck 13. It wasn't open to guests, and even the crew was told to stay away unless they had authorization. Supposedly, it had been sealed off after a maintenance accident years ago. But rumors spread that someone had died there and that the area was never fully cleaned out. One night, I was reviewing photos in my studio when a strange folder appeared on my laptop labeled Deck 13. I never created it. Inside were blurry black and white photos of corridors I'd never seen before. And in every image, there was the same shadow, standing motionless, facing the camera. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe another crew member trying to freak me out. But the deeper I looked, the stranger it got. Each photo had a timestamp, and all were taken exactly 1 minute apart, between 2 a.m. and 2:20 a.m., the same time I was in my cabin, asleep. I went to the IT office to ask about it, but the technician looked confused. "There's no folder like that on your drive," he said, tilting his head. I showed him the screen again, but the folder had vanished. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps above me. My cabin was on Deck 12. The restricted area was supposedly 1 floor higher. The footsteps were slow, heavy, dragging. Then came a faint metallic creak, like a door being forced open. Against my better judgment, I climbed the crew stairs, flashlight in hand, up toward Deck 13 keel. When I reached the top, the metal door to Deck 13 was chained and padlocked. A sign read, "Maintenance area, do not enter." But what chilled me wasn't the message. It was the faint breathing sound coming from behind it. Slow, shallow breaths, like someone waiting. I called out, "Hello? Is someone in there?" No reply, just silence. And then the unmistakable sound of fingernails scratching metal. I ran back down, heart pounding. I reported it to security the next morning, but they brushed it off. "Probably ventilation sounds," they said. Still, that night, when I went through my camera roll again, I found something impossible. New photos labeled Deck 13, time-stamped from the exact moment I'd been standing at the door. The last image showed myself holding my flashlight, but taken from the other side of the locked door. The next day, I couldn't focus on my work. Every time I passed a reflective surface, I thought I saw something. A shape standing behind me. I told my friend Luis, another photographer, about what happened. He laughed it off, but offered to come check the deck with me that night. At 1:45 a.m., we sneaked up the stairs. The lock was still there, but the chain was gone. Luis pushed the door slightly open, and a wave of cold air hit us, musty, stagnant, and reeking of rust. Inside was a long corridor with flickering lights and an endless hum of machinery. The floor was wet, and somewhere far down the hall, we heard what sounded like whispering. Luis whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. The voices grew louder, layered, like dozens of people murmuring in unison. We turned to leave, but the door had closed behind us. We banged on the door, shouting for help, but no one could hear us. The ship was massive, and this area wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Luis shone his flashlight forward, revealing walls lined with old, corroded photos of smiling passengers. Their eyes had been scratched out. A sudden noise echoed, like metal slamming. We turned, and for a brief second, I saw a figure crawl across the ceiling. limbs bent at impossible angles, moving faster than any human could. Luis screamed and ran down the corridor, disappearing into the shadows. I chased after him, yelling his name, but my voice was swallowed by the thick, cold air. When I finally found him, he was standing motionless, facing a sealed cabin door. His flashlight lay on the floor, still on. I touched his shoulder, and he slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were completely black. "Luis," I whispered, backing away. His expression was blank, like he wasn't even alive. He blinked slowly, then whispered something I couldn't understand. The words echoed strangely, almost reversed, like a tape playing backward. I ran. I didn't care where, I just needed to find a way out. The corridor twisted and turned, but no matter how far I went, it always led me back to the same hallway with the photos. And then, I noticed something horrifying. In one of the photos on the wall was me. The same uniform, the same pose I was in right now. Only my reflection in the photo had no eyes. The lights flickered violently, and the whispering voices returned, chanting, synchronized, rhythmic, like some endless prayer trapped between metal walls. I collapsed against the door, covering my ears, begging for it to stop. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor near the stairwell. The door to deck 13 was sealed again, with the chain and lock reattached. Luis was gone. No trace of him. I ran to security, hysterical. They checked the ship's system logs and confirmed something chilling. Deck 13 had no power access, no ventilation, and no camera feeds. It didn't even exist in the blueprint. Yet, when they searched the area, they found Luis's ID badge on the other side of the locked door. They said he must have fallen overboard, but there was no record of it. No CCTV footage, no witnesses, just gone. I quit my job the next day, but before I left the ship, I took one last look at my laptop. The Deck 13 folder was back. This time, there was only one photo inside. It was me, asleep in my cabin. And behind me, a dark figure watching from the shadows. After I disembarked, strange things kept happening. My hotel room TV would turn on by itself, flickering between static and faint footage of the ship's corridors. My phone's photo gallery kept refilling with the Deck 13 pictures, even after I deleted them. One night, as I was packing to leave, I heard knocking on my window. 3 slow knocks, rhythmic, deliberate. My room was on the 7th floor, no balcony, no ledge. I called the police, but when they arrived, the window was covered in wet handprints, like someone had climbed out of the ocean and pressed against the glass. They checked the CCTV footage, but it glitched during the exact time of the incident. The officer muttered something I'll never forget. "You're not the first ex-crew member reporting this. All from the same ship. I never went near the ocean again." And yet, sometimes at night, I still hear that dragging sound, footsteps on metal, coming from above my ceiling. Years later, I joined an online forum for cruise ship workers. I posted my story, hoping someone would explain what happened. Most laughed, until one user replied, "You shouldn't have gone to Deck 13. It's not a place." "It's a recording," he explained, that Deck 13 was part of an older ship design, one that sank decades ago during a fire. The company rebuilt new vessels using the same digital blueprints, unknowingly replicating the ghost deck into every ship's system. That's why it existed in the computer, and sometimes appeared physically, when conditions matched the original tragedy's time and coordinates. The user ended with a final message before his account disappeared. If you ever hear footsteps above you, don't go upstairs. It's not part of this ship. Sometimes, when I dream, I'm back there, standing in the endless corridor, the walls echoing with whispers. Every time I wake, I find something wet on the floor beside my bed, like seawater. A few months ago, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, Deck 13, Manifest. Attached was a single file, a list of names. Mine was at the top, and right below it was Luis's. I deleted the email, unplugged my computer, and moved inland. But even here, hundreds of miles from the ocean, I still hear the creaking sound of metal shifting in waves. I've come to accept something horrible. Maybe Deck 13 was never a location. Maybe it's a state of being, a loop for those who saw too much. If you ever find yourself on a cruise and someone tells you there's no Deck 13, don't try to find it. It might already be looking for you. My name is Oliver, and I was a night shift steward on the Ocean Star, a luxury cruise liner that sailed between Miami and Barcelona in 2020. I'd worked there for 3 years, long enough to know every corridor, every trick of the light. But one night, something changed. I was cleaning Deck 3 when I noticed cabin 392's door was slightly open. That caught my attention because 392 had been unoccupied since the start of the voyage. A plumbing issue according to the maintenance logs. Still, from the hallway, I saw the lights flickering inside. I hesitated, then called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. When I stepped inside, I froze. The cabin was freezing cold, the kind of cold that bites your lungs. And on the bed lay a neatly folded crew uniform, perfectly arranged, but covered in saltwater stains. I checked the name tag stitched on the chest. It said, Oliver. I felt my stomach twist. The uniform was mine, identical down to the smallest detail. The name tag, the stitching, even the tiny ink stain near the collar. I turned to leave, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the small mirror near the desk, like someone standing just behind me. I spun around, nothing. Just the uniform on the bed, dripping water onto the carpet. When I opened the closet to check for anyone hiding, I found something worse. A pair of wet footprints leading out of the closet, but stopping halfway across the room, as if the person had vanished mid-step. Then came the sound. A soft, wet breathing. It wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from under the bed. I backed away, my knees weak, but the breathing grew louder. A slow, rasping inhale followed by a bubbling exhale, like lungs filled with water. I lifted the edge of the blanket with trembling fingers. My flashlight shook as I aimed it under the bed. But what I saw wasn't human. A man's face, bloated and pale, stared back at me, his mouth open as seawater trickled out. His eyes rolled upward, completely white. Then, without moving his body, he whispered, "You're late for your shift." I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed. When I looked again, he was gone. No trace of water, no footprints, nothing. The next morning, I tried to report it to my supervisor, but he looked at me strangely. "Oliver, cabin 392 was sealed after the last incident," he said. "You know that." "What incident?" I asked. He paused. "The steward before you drowned on the last voyage." His name was also Oliver. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of water dripping echoed in my cabin, though there was no leak anywhere. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bloated face staring back at me from the dark. When I checked the crew records later that day, I found an archived incident report. It described how a steward named Oliver Grant went missing during a storm 3 years earlier. Security found his room flooded with seawater from the inside. The ship's doors were locked. What chilled me most was the ID photo attached to the file. He looked exactly like me. Same jawline, same eyes, same crooked smile. The file had one more detail. Before he vanished, he reportedly told a colleague that he'd been seeing someone in cabin 392 who looked just like him. That night, when I returned to my own cabin, the lights were already on, and the air smelled like the ocean. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, hallucinations from too many sleepless nights. But the ocean smell only grew stronger. My clothes were damp every morning, as if I'd been outside in a storm. On the third night, I heard a knock on my cabin door. 3 times, slow, deliberate. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, except for a small puddle of water leading toward cabin 392. I followed it. My heart pounded as I stood before that door again. It was closed this time, but from inside I heard muffled coughing, like someone drowning. I turned the handle. The door swung open easily. The lights flickered on and off, revealing the same uniform on the bed. Only now, it was soaked, as though pulled straight from the ocean. And on the mirror above the desk, written in water, were 2 words. Help him. I took a shaky step forward, whispering, "Who are you?" The bathroom door creaked open slowly on its own, revealing a flooded floor. Ripples moved across the water, even though nothing touched it. Then a faint figure began to rise, translucent, featureless, like a shape made of liquid. It spoke in a voice that wasn't human. "I didn't mean to take your place." The lights went out. When they came back, the figure was gone. But my reflection in the mirror was smiling, even though I wasn't. I screamed and smashed the glass. Beneath the shards, I found something glinting. A rusted metal key engraved with 392. When I reported it to security, they checked cabin 392 again. It was empty, bone dry, and sealed. But when they reviewed the corridor camera footage from that night, the time-stamped clip showed me standing there, talking, gesturing, to no one. That was the night I stopped being able to tell what was real. I started hearing voices on the ship's intercom, faint whispers during dead air moments. Once, I clearly heard, "Cabin 392 is ready." No one else seemed to notice. When we docked in Barcelona, I decided to quit. But as I packed, I noticed something inside my duffel bag, a wet crew ID badge. The name on it wasn't mine. It read, Oliver Grant. The photograph was of the man I'd seen under the bed. I ran to the upper deck, desperate for air. The sea looked endless and still. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing near the railing, wearing my uniform, back turned, staring into the water. I shouted, "Hey!" But he didn't move. When I reached him, the figure turned around, and I was staring at myself. The other me smiled faintly and said, "You shouldn't have come back." Before I could move, he stepped backward, over the railing, and fell silently into the dark water below. I screamed for help, but by the time security arrived, there was no one there. They assumed I was drunk or delirious, and I was ordered to rest. But when they showed me the security footage, it didn't make sense. The cameras captured only one person at the railing, me. The next morning, my supervisor handed me a transfer notice. "You're being reassigned to maintenance," he said. "Cabin inspections, starting on deck 3. I scanned the document. My first assignment was listed in bold letters, Cabin 392. I refused to go. But the order was final. Non-compliance meant immediate termination. So I went trembling down the familiar hallway to that cursed door. When I unlocked it, the room was empty. No smell of salt, no wet carpet, nothing. I exhaled shakily. Maybe it really was over. Then, from the bathroom, I heard a faint dripping sound. When I looked inside, I saw the sink faucet running. The mirror was fogged up, even though the water was cold. And written across the steam, perfectly neat, were the words, "Welcome back." The lights flickered, and my reflection in the mirror slowly turned its head on its own, even though I stood perfectly still. It smiled. Then water began pouring out of the sink, flooding the floor, rising fast around my legs. Before everything went black, I heard the intercom again. "Cabin 392, checked in. They say the Ocean Star went missing for 2 days on its return trip. Its GPS malfunctioning mid-route. When it finally reappeared, everything seemed normal, except one thing. Cabin 392 was listed as occupied on the manifest. But no guest by that name ever boarded. No one's heard from me since that voyage, not officially at least. Some say the new stewards still get calls from Cabin 392 asking for towels, even when the room is sealed. Sometimes they find wet footprints outside the door, leading toward the deck. And if they follow them long enough, they say the water starts to move on its own, forming the shape of a man, smiling faintly, whispering, "You're late for your shift." If you ever board the Ocean Star and you see a door labeled 392, do yourself a favor, keep walking. Because once the ocean chooses your name, it never forgets it. My name is Mark Stevenson, and this story happened during a cruise I took in 2019. It was supposed to be a simple vacation, a break from the chaos of my work life. I booked a small interior cabin, but when I checked in, the receptionist smiled and said, "Congratulations, sir. You've been upgraded to an ocean view suite, Cabin 329." I didn't think twice. Who turns down an upgrade? The room was beautiful, wide glass windows overlooking the endless blue sea. Everything seemed perfect, until that night. Around 2:47 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like soft humming near my bed. I sat up, disoriented. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight, reflecting off the waves. Then I noticed it, a faint shadow by the window, shaped like a woman, just standing there. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was exhaustion, nothing more. But deep down, something didn't feel right about Cabin 329. The next morning, I brushed it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light or my tired mind. I decided to explore the ship, the pool, restaurants, decks, anything to shake off that weird feeling. Everyone looked happy, laughing, drinking, and tanning under the sun. But that night, I woke up again at almost the same time, 2:45 a.m. This time, I heard something. A whisper, soft and melodic, coming from near the window. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from outside. I approached slowly, heart pounding. The ocean was black, endless. The whisper grew louder, like someone calling from beneath the water. Then, just as I leaned closer, a pale hand slapped against the glass from the outside. I jumped back, frozen. The hand slid downward, leaving a wet streak before disappearing. The next morning, there was no mark. The window was spotless. I decided to mention it casually to one of the cleaning staff, a young woman named Lucia. When I told her my cabin number, she froze. "Cabin 329. She repeated softly. Her smile faded completely. "Sir, if I were you, I'd ask to move." I frowned. "Why? What happened?" She looked around nervously and whispered, "That room belonged to a woman last year. She came alone. They found her missing on the third night. They said she fell overboard, but..." Lucia's eyes darted toward the sea. "Some of us don't believe she ever left." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to believe it was just superstition. Seafarers are full of ghost stories. But that night, when I came back to the room, the bed was neatly made, and on the pillow lay a single wet strand of long black hair. I hadn't seen anyone enter. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the ship, every echo in the corridor made my heart race. That night, around 3 a.m., I heard crying outside my door. A woman's sobs, soft, broken, like she was standing right outside. I opened the door slowly, peering into the dimly lit corridor. Empty. Only the hum of the ship's engines below. But the crying didn't stop. It echoed faintly from down the hall near the emergency exit. I followed it, step by step, until I reached the end of the corridor. The crying stopped. I stood there, listening. And then, from behind me, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, nothing but shadows. My hands trembled as I ran back to my room. That night, I locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and didn't move until sunrise. By the fifth night, exhaustion had me on edge. I barely ate, barely spoke to anyone. I just wanted the cruise to end. At 2:43 a.m., a loud click snapped me awake. The window latch, the heavy steel lock, was open. The glass swung outward slightly, letting in cold ocean air. I jumped out of bed and slammed it shut, locking it again. My hands were shaking. Then I heard it. The same humming, now inside the room. A woman's silhouette shimmered near the dresser, dripping wet, long black hair clinging to her face. She stared at me without eyes, just dark hollows where they should have been. I screamed, stumbled backward, and when I blinked, she was gone. Only the floor remained wet beneath where she stood. The humming didn't stop until dawn finally gathered the courage to report everything to the captain. He listened quietly, expression unreadable. When I finished, he sighed and looked out at the sea. "You're not the first," he said. "That cabin has been troublesome. We avoid assigning it when we can. But sometimes bookings get mixed." I leaned forward. "Who was she? The woman who disappeared?" He hesitated before replying. "A honeymooner. Her husband reported her missing after a fight. He claimed she jumped overboard, but passengers in nearby cabins swore they heard her scream before the splash." He paused. "We never found her body." That night, I couldn't bring myself to return to the room. But when I finally did, I found a message written on the fogged-up mirror. He pushed me. The next evening, I stood by the window staring into the dark waves. The sea looked calm. Too calm. I almost laughed at myself for being paranoid. Then the tapping started. Slow, rhythmic. From beneath the ship, tap, tap, tap. It grew louder, moving along the hull, right below my window, like someone knocking from underwater. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Then I heard her voice, faint, distorted through the waves. "Help. Me." The window fogged again. But this time, instead of words, there was a watery handprint spreading across the glass. From inside. That was when I realized She wasn't outside anymore. She was in the room. The following morning, the ship stopped at a port for refueling. I decided to leave early. I went to the reception to check out. But before I could, a man approached the counter beside me, tall, tanned, with cold blue eyes. He smiled faintly when the receptionist greeted him. "Welcome back, Mr. Reed." "Cabin 329, as usual?" My stomach dropped. Reed. That was the name I'd heard in the captain's office. The husband. He turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "You're staying in my wife's cabin?" Before I could answer, he smiled. The kind of smile that hides something terrible. "Tell her I said hello." When I looked up again, he was gone. Vanished into the crowd. That night, my last night, I decided to record everything. I set my phone on the desk, facing the window. Around 2:40 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply. The lights flickered. Then, water began seeping from under the walls, flooding the floor. I grabbed my bag, but the door wouldn't open. The room filled with the scent of salt and decay. The mirror fogged again. "He's here." I turned and saw her, behind me in the reflection, her drowned face inches from mine. Then a second figure appeared, the man with blue eyes, standing beside her, smiling. I screamed, and everything went black. When the ship docked, crew members found my room empty, door locked from the inside, floor soaked. My belongings were still there, but the only thing out of place was my phone. The video showed static for 2 hours. Then, faintly, the sound of water dripping. At 2:47 a.m., the camera caught a silhouette moving across the room, a woman's outline. And then, for a split second, a man's face leaning into view, smiling before the feed cut out. Cabin 329 is still listed as unavailable on the crew's website. But every few months, someone reports seeing wet footprints leading to its door, and a soft humming echoing through the hallways. My name is Rebecca Nolan. In 2018, I went on a 2-week cruise to the Caribbean with my best friend, Claire. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. Endless buffets, sunsets, and the soft hum of the ocean beneath our feet. But from the very first night, something felt wrong. We were standing on the upper deck, taking selfies under the stars, when we noticed a woman leaning over the railing alone. She was wearing a white sundress that swayed with the wind, her long hair almost glowing in the moonlight. Claire said, "She looks sad." "Maybe she's seasick." Before I could reply, the woman turned toward us, her face pale, her eyes distant, and whispered something we couldn't hear. Then she stepped backward into the darkness and vanished. We screamed. Crew members rushed over, but when they checked, there was no one there. The CCTV footage? Blank, as if that section of the deck never existed. That was the start of the nightmare. The next morning, Claire and I couldn't stop talking about what we'd seen. We expected chaos, people searching, questions, announcements. But strangely, nothing happened. No one mentioned a missing woman. When we went to the front desk to report it, the staff looked confused. "Ma'am, there's no report of any incident," the clerk said. "Check the CCTV," I insisted. He typed something into the system, then frowned. That camera was offline last night. I asked for the passenger list. Maybe she was on it. The clerk hesitated, then printed one out. Claire and I scanned the names, but none stood out. Then Claire froze. "Becca," she whispered, pointing at one entry. There it was. Cabin 441, occupant, Lila Nolan. my last name. I didn't know anyone by that name. We decided to find cabin 441. It was on the lower deck, isolated, far from the luxury suites and bars. The hallway leading to it was colder, quieter, the kind of silence that feels heavy. When we reached the door, the nameplate beside it read, L. Nolan. I hesitated, then knocked. No response. I tried again, louder. Still nothing. Finally, I turned the handle. It opened easily. Inside, the room was spotless, except for one thing. A white sundress hanging on the back of the chair. The same dress we saw last night. Claire whispered, "What if she's you?" I wanted to laugh it off, but something deep inside me knew this wasn't just coincidence. That night, when I returned to my own cabin, there was a damp footprint near my bed, small, bare, and facing toward the window. The next night, I dreamt of drowning. I saw my own reflection in the water, but it wasn't me. Her eyes were hollow, her hair floating around her face like black seaweed. I woke up gasping, soaked in sweat. When I turned toward the window, the reflection was still there. I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding. The reflection moved differently. When I stepped left, it stayed still. Then it smiled. The window fogged, and words began to form slowly across the glass. "Remember me?" I screamed, and Claire burst in moments later. But when she looked, the glass was clear. Nothing was there. From that point on, I couldn't look at my own reflection without feeling her eyes staring back through it. I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the front desk and demanded to know about cabin 441. The receptionist called someone, then told me to wait. A few minutes later, an older crew member approached. His name tag read, Hector. He looked tired, like he'd seen too much. He led me to a corner of the lounge and whispered, "Cabin 441 isn't used anymore. The woman who stayed there, she jumped overboard 2 years ago. Name was Lila Nolan." My throat went dry. 2 years ago? He nodded. She was traveling alone. Said she was visiting the place she and her sister were supposed to go together before her sister died. My chest tightened. What was her sister's name? He looked at me carefully and said, "Rebecca." I didn't want to believe it, but the coincidence was too much. I found the ship's records room late that night, the door left slightly open. Inside were shelves stacked with old logbooks and incident reports. I searched for her name, Lila Nolan. It didn't take long. The report was dated August 12th, 2016. Cause of death: presumed suicide at sea. Final note: she claimed to see her dead sister calling to her from the water. The photo attached was unmistakable. The same woman from the deck. My supposed sister. As I stared at it, the lights flickered. The air turned icy. Behind me, a voice whispered, "You left me." I turned, but the room was empty. Only the papers fluttering from a cold wind that shouldn't have been there. I barely slept after that. Claire wanted to leave the cruise early, but we were days from the next port. I started hearing Lila's voice, in the corridors, in the waves, even through the ventilation system. One night, I heard her singing softly, a lullaby my mother used to sing to me. It was impossible. She couldn't have known that. I covered my ears, whispering, "Stop, stop, stop." Then my cabin phone rang. I hesitated before answering. The line crackled with static, then a faint voice whispered, "Rebecca, it's time to come home." I threw the phone to the floor. Claire burst in seconds later, saying she heard the same voice, from her phone too, the next night. The sea turned violent. Waves crashed against the hull as thunder rolled across the sky. Passengers stayed in their rooms while the ship rocked. I stared at the window, watching lightning illuminate the black ocean. That's when I saw her again, standing on the deck below, completely dry despite the rain. She raised her hand slowly, pointing upward, right at me. Then I heard her voice echo through the wind. "Come back." The power flickered, and the entire ship plunged into darkness. I felt something cold grip my ankle, fingers pulling me toward the window. Claire grabbed me, screaming, but the invisible force yanked harder until I smashed against the glass. When I woke, I was in the infirmary. Claire sat beside me, pale and trembling. "You almost drowned," she whispered. Apparently, the crew found me outside on the lower deck, unconscious, clothes soaked with seawater. The strange part? The storm hadn't reached that part of the ship yet. The captain wanted to question me, but Claire insisted we disembark at the next port. Before we left, I asked Hector if he believed me. He nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "the sea doesn't let go of the ones it's claimed. She must have thought you were her. Or maybe you were." I didn't answer. Weeks later, I was home. But the sea never left me. I started seeing her in mirrors, puddles, even the reflection of my phone screen, always standing just behind me, smiling softly. One morning, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a cruise brochure. For the same ship, the same cabin number, and the name on the ticket, Lila Nolan. There was no explanation, just one line written in neat handwriting. "It's time for our trip, sister." I looked into the mirror and saw her standing beside me. And for a second, I couldn't tell which reflection was mine. My name is Derek Hall, and I used to work as a night shift cook on the Emerald Star cruise. The midnight buffet was my responsibility, a small but popular spread for guests who couldn't sleep. Every night at exactly 12 a.m., I'd open the line, refill the dishes, and watch half-asleep passengers stumble in for a snack before disappearing back to their cabins. But one night, around 12:30, the kitchen lights flickered and went out for 3 seconds. When they came back on, I smelled something strange, not food, not oil, but the unmistakable scent of burnt flesh. I rushed to the grill, thinking maybe something caught fire. But everything was clean, cold. Then, from the far end of the buffet, I saw her. A woman in an old-fashioned dinner dress, her face pale and her right hand blackened like it had been burned. She was holding a plate, but nothing was on it. When I blinked, she was gone. The next morning, I asked one of the older crew members, an engineer named Paul, if anyone had died on the ship before. He laughed nervously and said, "This ship's been running 20 years, Derek." "People die all the time," I pressed him about the kitchen area. His face changed. "Ah, you mean the fire?" Apparently, 15 years ago, the Emerald Star had a kitchen fire during its maiden voyage. A grease flare had exploded near the buffet, killing a passenger instantly, a woman named Marissa Delane. She was known for being the ship's first official death. I didn't know what to say. That night, when I returned for my shift, the smell came back, stronger this time. I found greasy black handprints on the metal counter, the same height as hers. The buffet was quiet that night. Only 2 guests came by. Around 1 a.m., as I was cleaning the counters, I saw her again. She wasn't standing this time. She was sitting at one of the corner tables, motionless, her plate still empty. The air around her shimmered faintly like heat waves. I whispered, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't look up. I took a step closer and realized I could see through her. Her outline was faint, but the flickering lights made her shimmer like steam over boiling oil. Then, as I watched, she slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes were gone. Only black burn marks where they should have been. I dropped my tray and bolted out of the kitchen. I told my supervisor, Michael, everything. He didn't laugh. He looked worried. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "Follow me." He led me to the security office and pulled up footage from the previous night. I watched as the cameras showed the buffet area empty, until suddenly the chair at the corner table pulled out by itself. Then the metal trays began to shake slightly. But what froze my blood was the end. When I appeared in the footage, staring at the chair, the camera glitched for half a second. And in that frame, the woman's charred face appeared right behind me. Michael turned off the screen and said, "Don't tell anyone. We're not supposed to talk about her." The next night, I decided to ignore it. I told myself it was stress, imagination. Around 1:15 a.m., I went into the walk-in freezer to grab more meat. The door closed behind me, normal, automatic. But then came a faint knock. At first, I thought it was a coworker messing around. But the knocks continued, rhythmic, 3 taps, pause, then 3 again. They were coming from inside one of the metal shelves. My breath fogged the air. Slowly, I moved closer and saw a small patch of frost forming on the door of the meat locker, in the shape of a handprint. The lights flickered, and I heard her whisper, "It still burns." The door behind me slammed shut. After that night, I demanded answers. The head chef, a grizzled man named Andre, sighed and said, "We all know she's here. We call her the midnight guest." He explained that Marissa had been standing too close to the buffet when the oil line burst. The flames engulfed her before anyone could reach her. She was found clutching her plate, still waiting to be served. Andre leaned closer. "She comes back for what she never got. So long as the buffet stays open, she'll keep showing up." That night, we decided to close early, just once, to see what happened. At 12:45, the buffet lights flickered. The smell returned. Then every single covered dish slammed open on its own. I was stacking trays when I noticed smoke, faint at first, then thick. The alarms didn't go off. The sprinklers stayed silent. The smoke twisted, taking shape, her shape. Her face flickered in the haze, eyes black and hollow. Flames licking across her burned arm. I stumbled backward, coughing, as the room filled with heat. My apron caught fire, but when I tore it off and looked back, the smoke had vanished. No fire, no damage, just the same clean kitchen, untouched. Except my arm was blistered, burned exactly where I'd seen the flames touch her. The others didn't see it, only me. A week later, I couldn't take it anymore. I planned to quit, but while cleaning one last time, I found an old binder wedged behind the refrigerator. It was a handwritten recipe book labeled Marissa's Cookbook. Inside were neat notes about sauces, pastries, and something called Final Dish. The page was burnt around the edges, but I could still read the last line. "Serve hot. I'll know when it's ready that night." Out of morbid curiosity, I cooked it. Roasted chicken with wine glaze, just as written. When I lifted the lid to check the meat, the room filled with smoke again. and her voice whispered, "Finally." When it cleared, the plate was gone. The next night, I found the buffet already set up, but I hadn't done it. The dishes were steaming, perfect, every plate placed exactly right. At 12:01, she appeared again, standing behind the counter. This time she smiled. I froze, trembling. She whispered, "Thank you, chef." Then she walked to the center of the buffet, placed her plate down, and dissolved into smoke that rose through the ceiling vents. The smell faded. The lights stopped flickering. For the first time in weeks, silence filled the kitchen. We never saw her again after that night. Months later, I took a new job on another ship. But the burn on my arm never fully healed. A perfect handprint shape, darker than skin, like something still clings to me. Sometimes, late at night, I smell that same faint odor. Burnt flesh mixed with rosemary and oil. And once, when I opened the walk-in freezer, I saw a plate sitting on the middle shelf, old, cracked, with my name scratched into the porcelain. I left the kitchen, and I've never cooked past midnight again. My name is Lucas, and I was part of the entertainment crew aboard the Ocean Serenity, a cruise liner known for its luxurious music nights. I was a pianist, playing in the Grand Lounge every evening as the waves rolled beneath us. It was peaceful, until the night we passed through the Bermuda Triangle. That evening, the lights flickered during my set. Guests laughed it off, clinking glasses. But I noticed something odd. The grand piano sounded slightly off-key, as if someone else were pressing the keys with me. Later that night, I went back to the lounge to practice alone. The ship was quiet, the sea outside completely still. When I sat down to play, a faint humming rose from the dark corners of the room. Soft voices, dozens of them, echoing through the vents, all humming in harmony with my music. I froze, because no one else was there. The humming grew clearer and stranger. It wasn't just one song. It was many voices layered together, like a chorus beneath the waves. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and the piano lid slammed shut on its own with a thunderous crack. I ran for the door, but before I reached it, the ship's PA system buzzed on by itself. A distorted voice whispered, "They're not gone, Lucas. They still sing below." I froze. My name. No one else knew I was here. When I finally escaped the lounge, I bumped into the night guard, Elena. Her face was pale. She asked if I'd heard it too, the singing. She'd been on patrol near the engine deck and said it was coming from the ocean itself, rising through the hull. Neither of us slept that night. By morning, half the crew was whispering about the voices. Passengers claimed they'd heard singing under the ship. One woman swore she saw faces in the water, pale and open-mouthed, drifting beside her cabin window. The captain dismissed it as sound reflections. But later that day, a storm hit out of nowhere. Black clouds, violent winds, and waves that made the massive ship groan. Elena and I were ordered to help move guests inside. As we rushed past the observation deck, lightning struck the sea, and for a moment, the water glowed blue-white. And in that flash, I saw them. Hundreds of figures beneath the waves, moving in slow, synchronized motions, their mouths open in silent song. Then, the lights went out. When power returned, chaos broke loose. The lower decks were flooding, even though there were no hull breaches reported. Passengers screamed as cold water rushed through corridors. Elena and I ran to the storage hold to check the pumps. But when we opened the hatch, the sound hit us like a wave. the humming. Louder than ever, echoing through every metal wall. The water inside was glowing faintly blue, swirling like it was alive. Then I saw hands, pale, translucent, reaching up through the water. We slammed the hatch shut, gasping. The captain's voice shouted through the radio, ordering everyone topside. But as we climbed, something wet and cold brushed my ankle, like fingers trying to pull me back down. When we reached the main deck, dozens of passengers were staring overboard, entranced, swaying gently in rhythm with the storm. They were humming the same melody. Elena shouted at them, but no one moved. Then one by one, they began stepping over the railing, walking straight into the raging sea. The captain screamed orders through the intercom, but his voice was drowned by the wind and the song. The choir below the ship had grown deafening. I grabbed Elena's arm, dragging her toward the bridge, but when we entered, the captain wasn't there. Only his hat sat on the control console, dripping wet. The radar screen blinked wildly, showing hundreds of small dots moving around the ship, surrounding it. "Those aren't boats," Elena whispered. The ship suddenly shuddered, like something massive brushed its hull. Then came a deep, resonant note, like a bass chord from beneath the ocean. It vibrated through my bones. And just like that, everything went silent. When the storm cleared, more than 30 passengers were missing. The official report claimed they were lost at sea during the storm, but Elena and I knew better. Over the next few days, the ship drifted aimlessly. The music lounge was sealed off after someone claimed to hear voices inside again. I wanted to destroy that piano, but the captain's replacement forbade anyone from touching it. That night, unable to sleep, I went back to the lounge alone. The piano lid was open this time. A faint blue light pulsed from inside. When I pressed a single key, the entire room hummed back. The sound vibrated the walls, the windows, even the ocean outside. And in the reflection on the piano's polished surface, I saw dozens of faces staring back at me. I ran to the deck again, only to find the sea glowing beneath us, the same blue hue as before. The choir had returned. The voices rose like a wave, harmonizing in unnatural tones. Some passengers came out of their cabins, dazed, whispering the same melody under their breath. Elena found me, tears in her eyes. "They're calling us," she said. Before I could answer, she walked straight to the railing. I grabbed her, yelling, but she only whispered one word: "Listen." Her body went limp, and she fell backward into the glowing ocean. I screamed her name, but the water swallowed her instantly. And for a brief second, I saw her face among the others beneath the waves, singing peacefully. The following morning, the ocean returned to normal, calm, lifeless, and silent. The ship made port in Miami 3 days later, and investigators immediately boarded. They found no traces of the missing passengers or crew, not even Elena. When they searched the lounge, the piano was gone. In its place was a small puddle of seawater and a single shell. I was questioned for hours, but I couldn't explain what had happened. The only thing I could recall was the final melody, the sound of the sea singing back. I quit working on ships after that. But sometimes, late at night, when I sit at a piano and let my fingers drift across the keys, I swear I can hear them again. Months passed. I'd moved inland, far away from the coast, hoping distance would bury the memories. But one night, I received a parcel with no return address. Inside was a cassette tape labeled only, "From Elena." My hands trembled as I placed it in an old player. Static crackled, then the unmistakable sound of waves. After a few seconds, soft humming began. The same haunting tune from that night. I froze when a woman's voice joined in. Elena's voice. She was singing along with the choir, her tone calm, peaceful, almost welcoming. Then the tape warped, and through the distortion came faint whispers. "Join us, Lucas. The sea remembers." I ripped the tape out, heart racing. But when I looked down, the cassette was dripping wet, salt water pooling on the floor. And faintly, I could still hear the humming coming from inside it. It's been 2 years since that night. I haven't spoken to anyone from the Ocean Serenity since. Most of the surviving crew quit and disappeared into quiet lives. But something strange has been happening lately. Every time I play the piano, even for a few seconds, I hear the faint echo of another note following mine. Last week, I recorded myself playing to prove I wasn't imagining it. When I played the footage back, I nearly dropped my phone. Behind me, reflected in the piano's glossy surface, stood Elena, soaked, eyes closed, smiling faintly. And behind her, an entire choir of drowned passengers. Their mouths opened as if mid-song, but no sound came out, only the faint rhythm of waves in the background. Now, I can't even sleep without hearing the ocean's song through my walls. They're calling again, and deep down, I know. The next time I hear that melody, I won't be able to resist, because the sea doesn't forget, and it never lets go of its choir. My name is Ethan, and I was part of the maintenance crew aboard the Aurora Star, a mid-sized cruise ship sailing from Halifax to Reykjavik. We'd been at sea for 4 days when the weather changed. No storm, no wind. Just an endless gray fog that swallowed the horizon. At first, we assumed it was natural. The captain slowed our speed, activated the foghorn, and reassured everyone it was temporary. But after 2 full days, the fog hadn't lifted. It clung to the ship, heavy and still, so thick we couldn't even see the bow from the deck. Passengers grew restless. The Wi-Fi and radios went dead. And every night, the same strange phenomenon occurred. Faint footsteps echoing on the upper deck, even though no one was allowed there after dark. One night, I decided to check it out myself. I climbed to deck 9 around 2 a.m., the air cold and wet against my skin. But what I saw wasn't footsteps. It was handprints, hundreds of them, pressed along the fog-covered glass. I wiped the glass, but the prints didn't smear. They were inside the glass, like something had pressed from within. I radioed the bridge, but only static came through. The foghorn groaned again, low and distant, echoing far longer than it should have. That's when I noticed the sound. Faint whispers carried in the mist. They didn't come from any direction. They were everywhere, murmuring words I couldn't understand. Then, the deck lights flickered, and I saw a shape moving in the fog. Tall, human-like, but stretched and shifting, as if the mist itself had taken form. It stopped at the far end of the deck, and for a moment, I thought I saw eyes, glowing faintly white. I blinked, and it was gone. When I turned to leave, I found another handprint. This time on my jacket sleeve, cold and wet, perfectly shaped, and slowly sinking into the fabric like it was melting through. The next morning, I reported everything to Captain Rourke, but he brushed it off. "Optical illusion," he said. "Fog plays tricks on your eyes." But when we checked the security footage, the camera facing Deck 9 was completely blank. No static, no corruption, just black screen for the entire night. That evening, more crew members began complaining about strange dreams, all of them the same. walking endlessly through gray fog and hearing someone calling their name. By nightfall, the fog had grown denser. The ship's lights barely reached 10 feet ahead. It was as though we were floating in nothingness. I stood near the bow, scanning the mist. Suddenly, I heard someone whisper my name. Ethan. It was Elena, one of the stewards. She stood barefoot at the edge, her eyes wide and unfocused. Elena, I asked. She smiled faintly. They're waiting for us, she whispered, then stepped forward, vanishing into the fog. We searched for hours, but Elena was gone. The fog was so dense that even the ship's sonar was useless. The next day, another crewman vanished, a mechanic named Omar. He'd been repairing a generator below deck. When we checked the area, the tools were still there, the metal floor slick with condensation. But drawn across the wall were wet handprints leading straight into a maintenance hatch, one that opened directly to the ocean. That night, the foghorn didn't sound at all. Instead, we heard voices, dozens of them, whispering through the ship's corridors. Some sounded like the missing crew. Others were unfamiliar, slow, echoing, and hollow. I locked myself in my cabin, trying to drown them out. But when I looked through the porthole, I froze. The fog outside was moving, slowly coiling like smoke underwater. And in it, faces began to form. I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., the power flickered and the hallway lights went dead. When they came back on, condensation had covered every wall, glistening like sweat. Drawn across the surface were words written by invisible hands. Turn back. But it was too late. The navigation system had stopped working, and every direction led us back into the same gray void. I went to the upper deck to help calm passengers. Some stood motionless by the railings, staring into the mist, lips moving as if silently speaking to someone. A woman suddenly screamed, pointing toward the fog. We all saw it. Figures walking parallel to the ship, their outlines flickering like candlelight, vanishing and reappearing in the distance. They looked like people, but slightly too tall, their movements too slow, as if dragging through invisible water. By the fourth day, panic spread. Half the guests refused to leave their rooms. Others swore they could hear knocking from the walls, like something was moving inside the metal itself. Captain Rourke tried broadcasting over the PA, but the speakers emitted only faint static. Then, a whisper joined in mid-broadcast. It mimicked his voice perfectly, saying the same words seconds after him, but distorted, deeper. That night, the fog seeped inside the ship. It slithered through air vents, curling along the hallways like living smoke. When I breathed, I could taste salt and something metallic like rusted iron. I ran toward the storage area to seal the vents. That's when I saw them. Figures standing in the fog-filled corridor. Their bodies were gray and dripping, their faces expressionless except for their mouths, which hung open like they were trying to speak underwater. And when one reached for me, its hand passed straight through my arm, ice cold but leaving a mark like frostbite. By dawn, the captain was missing. The bridge door hung open, controls covered in condensation. The radar now showed a single dot moving toward us, massive, slow, and silent. The fog outside began to glow faintly from within, like moonlight through milk. I stared, horrified, as a shadow of another ship emerged in the distance. Black, decayed, and moving perfectly in sync with ours. It had no lights, no sound, just rows of shattered windows and faint silhouettes moving behind them. Then our foghorn blasted once. But the echo came not from the sea, but from the ghostly vessel itself, replying in perfect time. I realized we weren't sailing through the fogs anymore. We were sailing with it. Crew members began jumping overboard. Some said they saw loved ones standing on the deck of the ghostly ship, waving for them to come closer. I tried stopping one, a young girl named Marcy. But when I grabbed her, she turned toward me, eyes white and fog seeping from her mouth. She whispered, "We're home now," before dissolving into mist that slipped through my fingers. I stumbled backward, horrified, as the ship's alarm blared. The engines had failed. We were drifting, pulled gently toward the ghost ship's dark hull. In the final moment before impact, I saw dozens of faces pressed against its windows, all moving in slow, synchronized motion. Some of them looked like our missing crew. And then, the world went white. When I woke up, I was lying on a cold metal floor. The fog was gone. The ship floated silently on calm, open water beneath a bright morning sun. Rescue helicopters arrived hours later. Only 8 of us were found alive. They said the others had fallen overboard during the storm. But we knew the truth. There had been no storm. I asked if they'd seen another ship on the radar before rescuing us. The officer shook his head. "There was nothing," he said. "Just open ocean." When we reached land, they took us for questioning. All 8 survivors described the same thing, a black ship in the fog. But the officials dismissed it as collective hallucination due to hypoxia. Still, I know what I saw. It's been 6 months. The Aurora Star was decommissioned and sold for scrap. But sometimes, when the tide is low, fishermen swear they hear its foghorn echoing from miles away, even though the ship no longer exists. I moved inland, but I still dream about the fog. In those dreams, I'm back on deck, surrounded by the gray mist, unable to see anything but shadows. Last night, I woke to the faint sound of a foghorn outside my window. I live over 200 miles from the coast. When I looked outside, the street was covered in thin mist, and through it, I saw a familiar figure standing motionless under the streetlight. Elena. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then the foghorn sounded again, louder this time, rattling the glass. When the mist cleared, she was gone. But on my window pane, there was a single wet handprint, just like the ones that started it all. And now, I can hear the whisper again. They've found me. My name is Natalie, and I've worked as a photographer on cruise ships for almost 6 years. I've seen the best and worst sides of human nature. Weddings, fights, breakups, and even the occasional overboard scare. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the Aurora Majesty during a 2-week voyage across the Pacific. It started with something small, reflections that didn't line up. I'd take pictures of passengers by the pool, smiling under the sun. But when I reviewed the shots later, their reflections on the water were delayed. A second off, maybe 2. The faces didn't match the expressions above the surface. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was a camera glitch. But that night, when I was alone in my cabin, I saw it again. My reflection in the porthole glass, smiling at me, even though my own lips never moved. The next morning, I went to the ship's photo gallery to print the previous night's shots. But every picture taken after 11 p.m. was corrupted, all except one. It was a photo of me. I didn't remember taking it. But there I was, standing by the railing in my uniform, staring into the ocean. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. That's when I was asleep, or at least I thought I was. I asked the security team to check the CCTV. After half an hour of searching, The officer called me back, pale-faced. "We found the footage," he said. "You were standing there, exactly like the photo. But your reflection on the water, it didn't move at all." That was when I started keeping my cabin lights on at night. The next morning, I went to the ship's photo gallery to print the previous night's shots. But every picture taken after 11 p.m. was corrupted, all except one. It was a photo of me. I didn't remember taking it. But there I was, standing by the railing in my uniform, staring into the ocean. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. That's when I was asleep, or at least I thought I was. I asked the security team to check the CCTV. After half an hour of searching, the officer called me back, pale-faced. "We found the footage," he said. "You were standing there, exactly like the photo. But your reflection on the water, it didn't move at all." That was when I started keeping my cabin lights on at night. The next day, a guest came to my desk asking for her printed photo from the pool area. I searched the gallery computer, found her file, and froze. In her picture, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a soaked woman in the same photographer's uniform I wore. Drenched, hair covering her face, one pale hand resting on the guest's shoulder. I ran through the logs. No one else on the photography team had been near the pool that day. When I zoomed in, my blood turned cold. The wet uniform had my name tag on it. That evening, I went back to the spot where the photo was taken. The pool was closed, the deck empty except for the rhythmic hum of the ship's engines. I leaned over the railing, staring into the dark water. At first, I saw nothing. Then a faint shimmer rippled below, like a figure standing beneath the surface, mirroring my movements. I raised my hand. The figure did the same, but then it smiled, while I did not. The grin widened until it stretched unnaturally, revealing black, water-filled gaps where teeth should be. I stumbled back, gasping, as a cold mist rose up from the waves, soaking my face. When I wiped my eyes, the reflection was gone. I went straight to the ship's night manager, a stern older man named Collins. I told him everything, the reflection, the photos, the laughter. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he sighed. "You shouldn't stare into the water at night," he said quietly. "We've had incidents. Every ship does." He handed me a printed report, an old one, dated 10 years back. A photographer named Marissa Lane had gone missing during a storm, last seen near the pool deck. Her last words were recorded by a passenger. "She's calling me from below." The photo in the file made my stomach twist. Marissa looked exactly like me. That night, I woke to the sound of dripping water. The air smelled of salt. I turned on the light. The floor was wet. A trail of water led from the porthole to my bed. I looked toward the window and froze. There was a pale hand pressed against the glass from outside. The fingers moved slowly, dragging across the surface as if writing something. Letters began to form. "Trade." I backed away, trembling as the porthole fogged up completely. Behind it, the faint outline of a face appeared. Mine, but decayed, eyes hollow and black. By morning, the ship's PA announced we were entering rough seas. Passengers were told to stay inside. I sat on my bed, shaking, listening to the wind scream outside. Then 3 knocks on my door. Slow, wet. When I opened it, there was no one, just a puddle leading down the hall. I followed it, every nerve screaming to turn back. The trail ended at the pool deck. The rain had stopped. The water was calm. And there she was, standing on the other side of the pool, drenched, head tilted, that same awful grin. "It's your turn," she said softly. before stepping backward into the water and vanishing beneath the surface. I ran back to my cabin, grabbed my camera, and pointed it at the porthole. My hands were shaking, but I took a photo anyway. The flash reflected off the glass, blinding me for a second. When I looked at the screen, I saw myself, standing outside, underwater, smiling. My reflection had finally switched places. I screamed, but my voice gurgled, filled with water. The cabin tilted, and my vision blurred. The last thing I remember was the sound of the ocean roaring inside my room. They found my cabin empty the next morning, door locked from the inside. Only my camera remained sitting on the bed, still wet. The ship's management marked it as a missing crew case, but passengers whispered something else, that a new photographer had been seen by the pool later that day, pale, soaked, smiling too long for comfort. They say if you take a photo near the railing after midnight on the Aurora Majesty, you might catch a second version of yourself, standing just below the surface, waiting for you to trade places. And that Dark Fears family were the 10 most disturbing true cruise ship horror stories. Each story, a chilling reminder that the ocean hides more than just its depth. It hides memories, lost voices, faces that never made it home. Out there, far from the safety of land, when the lights of the ship flicker and the water reflects too perfectly, remember this: the sea doesn't forget. It watches. It whispers. It keeps what it takes. Maybe next time you step onto a cruise ship deck at night and see your reflection smiling back at you, take a step back, because sometimes the reflection isn't yours anymore. If you enjoyed tonight's descent into the deep, make sure to like, subscribe, and join the Dark Fears family for more stories that lurk beneath the surface. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.